CEO mocked the black waiter. If you're so smart, then translate. Then she was left speechless. Fix it, Liam. Victoria Edwards' voice cut through the room like a whip. Her eyes narrowed with cold disdain as she glared at him across the sleek corporate table. Do you even understand what's at stake here? The entire company is depending on this AI, and you, she stopped, sneering. You can't even get it to stay online for more than 5 minutes. Liam stood frozen, his chest tight as every pair of eyes in the room shifted towards him. The pressure was palpable. He was at the back of the room, the last person anyone expected to be singled out for failure. Victoria had made sure of that. She had made it her mission to belittle him at every opportunity since he joined the team. You're a failed project, she continued, her voice dripping with scorn. You didn't even come through the right channels. No Ivy League credentials. No prestigious internships. Just some self-taught assistant. Is this what we have to show for your visionary ideas? Each word felt like a slap in the face, but Liam didn't react. He stood still, breathing through the insult, letting it roll off him. He was used to this, used to being underestimated by people like her, the ones who thought a college degree or the right connections were the only markers of competence. What Victoria didn't know was that underestimating him would be her greatest mistake. Liam's mind raced through the problem at hand. The AI system was malfunctioning, and the company's latest product launch was on the line. The crash had cost the company millions in lost business potential. But it wasn't just the machine at fault. It was a combination of poor decisions made by higher-ups like Victoria. Her decision to bypass key recommendations, ignoring technical warnings, had led to this disaster. Fix it or don't bother coming back, Victoria demanded, her voice sharp, laced with malice. The room fell silent. The weight of her command hung in the air like an executioner's sentence. Every eye on him, every whisper, was a reminder of his inferior position. But Liam didn't flinch. He wasn't about to let her define him. Instead, he reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of his phone. With a quiet, deliberate movement, he sent a quick text message. Prepare the files. I'll need them soon. As the words left his fingertips, he turned his attention back to the malfunctioning AI screen, his gaze steady. He wasn't going to argue with her. He wasn't going to beg. This wasn't about words. It was about action. Victoria's gaze remained fixed on him, waiting for him to respond, but Liam said nothing. He didn't need to. He knew what he had to do, and this time, his silence would speak louder than any defiance. The AI system had crashed again. For the third time in the span of just 1 week, the company's flagship product had faltered. The system, which was supposed to streamline their operations and bring in millions, had failed under the pressure of real-world testing. Each failure not only cost the company precious time but also significant business potential. And with the next major investment round looming, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Victoria Edwards stood at the front of the room, her face flushed with anger. The polished glass walls of the boardroom reflected her every movement, a stark contrast to the rising tension in the air. Liam felt every eye in the room on him. Executives, project leads, and senior managers who had all witnessed the debacle unfold over the past week. You, Victoria snapped, pointing at him, her voice sharp and accusatory. This is on you. How many times do I have to say it? Your so-called genius is costing this company millions. Liam, I gave you a chance, but all I've seen is failure after failure. You're an assistant, not a tech lead. Her words felt like daggers. Each insult was a public reminder of his position, a constant reinforcement of how little value he held in their eyes. Victoria's tone was dismissive, like she was speaking to a child who had failed a test. And the executives, silent as statues, simply watched. Some of them nodded in agreement, their faces blank, eyes focused anywhere but on him. Others exchanged nervous glances, but not one person spoke up to defend him. Liam stood motionless, his posture rigid, but his insides were beginning to tighten. He could feel the rising frustration and anger threatening to boil over, but he pushed it down. There was no room for that. Not now. He couldn't afford to lose his composure. Liam started, but Victoria cut him off with a sharp, commanding gesture. "I don't want to hear it," she sneered. "You were supposed to fix this. You've wasted enough time already. If this issue isn't resolved today, we'll lose our investors. We'll lose everything, and you'll lose your job. Are you prepared for that?" The weight of her words hung heavily in the room. The eyes of the senior executives bore down on him, some filled with judgment, others with indifference. The silence was suffocating. Liam's palms began to sweat, and for a fleeting moment, his thoughts clouded with panic. What if he couldn't fix this? What if it was too late? But then he shifted his focus. He could feel the subtle tremor of anxiety rising within him, but he was determined not to let it show. Instead, his mind honed in on the AI crash logs in front of him, where the solution might be buried. He had to find it. The logs, scattered across his screen, were dense, but he'd been here before. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as his eyes scanned for the anomalies he knew were there. He had no time to waste. Not only did the future of the project hinge on this, but his career did as well. The stakes were high, and if he failed, Victoria wouldn't hesitate to fire him. As Victoria continued her rant, her voice rising with each passing insult, Liam didn't flinch. He simply scanned the data, trying to tune out the noise around him. Someone should stop her. A colleague, Rachel, whispered softly to the person next to her, her voice almost drowned out by Victoria's tirade. But her words went unnoticed, lost in the growing crescendo of tension in the room. Liam knew this moment was critical. His career, the company's future, and his reputation all rested on finding the right solution. But with each passing second, the pressure mounted. And Victoria's mocking voice kept pushing, demanding a miracle he wasn't sure he could deliver. But he would try. He had no other choice. Liam stood in the center of the room, his back straight and shoulders squared. The crowd of senior executives, who had been silently watching him for the past several minutes, shifted uncomfortably. He could feel their gaze, but it didn't reach him. Their eyes darted between him and Victoria, the CEO whose every word seemed to sharpen the air. The tension was suffocating, yet Liam remained still, his expression calm. He could hear her insults echoing in his mind, each one a reminder of how little they thought of him, of his non-traditional background. But it didn't matter. The mocking tone in her voice, the disdain in the eyes of the executives, none of it touched him. Inside, there was a quiet certainty, a calm that felt almost dangerous in its depth. Victoria's words grew more biting with each passing second. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowed, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You've failed every single time, Liam, and you've made us look like amateurs. Fix this now or don't bother coming back. You've been given chance after chance, and this time, I will fire you." Liam didn't flinch. The insult stung, of course. The familiar feeling of being judged, dismissed, made to feel small was nothing new to him. It had happened before, at every job he'd had, at every turn in his life. The world saw him as the underdog, the outsider, and they mocked him for it. But what they didn't realize was that he didn't need their approval. He didn't need to prove himself to them. His actions, when the time came, would speak louder than any of their petty judgments. The room was silent, save for Victoria's angry breaths. Liam felt the pressure, but it wasn't crushing. It was freeing. The more they pushed, the more he knew what he had to do. Inside, it was as though a storm was gathering. Quietly, steadily, the calm before the storm was setting in. He could feel the power of that storm growing, but he kept it contained, focused, ready for the right moment. He wasn't going to rush. Victoria, still standing at the head of the table, was visibly growing frustrated. Her anger rose like a wave crashing against the shore. "You're wasting time," she shouted. "Do your job or leave. You've made enough excuses." Liam didn't even glance at her as her words fired off like bullets. His eyes stayed on the screen in front of him, scanning the AI logs with focused precision. He didn't need to be anywhere else. The solution was there, buried in the lines of code. It was a matter of finding it, methodically, carefully, without panic. After a long pause, Liam finally spoke, his voice low but clear. Let me take a look at the system logs first. I'll fix it. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a defiance. It was a statement, one that made the room fall silent. No one had expected him to respond that way, least of all Victoria. But Liam wasn't concerned with her. He wasn't concerned with anything else. He was only focused on the solution, and that, he knew, was the only thing that would matter in the end. Liam stood still for a moment, allowing the weight of the room's tension to settle around him. He had heard the insults, the ridicule, and the relentless demands. Now it was time to shift the power. With a calm, measured step, Liam approached the malfunctioning AI console. The harsh, accusatory words of Victoria continued to ring in his ears, but he was no longer listening. The time for words had passed. It was now time for action. Without looking up, he raised his hand and quietly requested a few basic tools from Riley, a junior developer who had been standing at the back of the room. Can I get the system logs and the diagnostic tool? Please, he asked, his voice steady, unbothered by the mocking gaze of the room. The executives continued to watch, some with a look of impatience, others with barely concealed amusement. Victoria's disdain was palpable, her eyes narrowing as she crossed her arms. This should be interesting, she muttered almost to herself, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. But despite the mockery, something unexpected happened. Riley, standing on the outskirts of the group, exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible glance with Liam. Then, without a word, he walked over, discreetly handing him a small USB drive containing the latest logs from the system. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight. It wasn't just the transfer of data. It was a silent symbol of support, a quiet defiance against the harsh environment they had all been forced to endure. Liam nodded in gratitude but didn't acknowledge the crowd. He inserted the USB drive into the console and began pulling up the logs. His movements were deliberate, slow at first, as he scanned the data with precision. Every line of code, every error report was a clue, a puzzle he had to solve, and Liam was methodical in his approach. There was no rushing, no frantic typing. He simply worked, letting the data guide him. Victoria, unable to hide her irritation, leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Liam with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. The more he worked, the more her expression soured. She had expected him to panic, to crumble under the pressure. Instead, he was moving with a quiet, steady confidence that she couldn't quite understand. The room, which had once been filled with hushed laughs and murmurs of mockery, now grew increasingly silent. Liam's every movement seemed to draw the attention of the entire room. The executives, once eager to see him fail, now found themselves watching in rapt silence as he continued his work. Each click of the keyboard, each line of code he adjusted, was a subtle defiance against the chaos around him. Finally, after several long moments, a low hum filled the room as the AI console began to show signs of life. The screen flickered, and a small green icon appeared, a sign of progress. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. The first signs of resolution. The tension in the room had shifted, and with it, the power. Liam didn't speak a word. He didn't need to. The machine was coming back online. Slowly, surely, he was turning the tide. And with it, he was proving that quiet competence could be just as powerful, if not more so, than any loud confrontation. A low murmur of laughter spread through the room, barely contained. The executives, once skeptical, now openly mocked him. Look at him, one of them whispered, eyes flicking towards Liam as he sat hunched over the malfunctioning AI console. He's pretending like he can fix this in 5 minutes. What a joke. Liam didn't acknowledge their comments. His fingers danced across the keyboard with deliberate precision, each stroke of the key slow and measured. He was no longer listening to the noise around him. Instead, his entire focus was on the system, on the lines of code, on the problem that had been left unsolved for days. As he typed, the crowd continued to snicker, their voices a dull hum in the background. Victoria's gaze bore into him, her arms crossed tightly, her lips curling in disdain. She watched him with the same arrogance that had permeated the entire room. convinced that he would fail just as he had in the past. But Liam remained unfazed. Every click, every adjustment he made was done with quiet confidence. His movements were methodical, far from frantic, as though he had been here before. It wasn't just about fixing the AI. It was about proving something far deeper, something that had been questioned time and time again. His competence, his expertise. With each line of code he corrected, something started to change. The machine, once dead and lifeless, began to hum softly. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a flicker of light on the screen. A single blink, then another. It was subtle, a tiny victory, but it was enough. The executives, once amused by the spectacle, now fell silent. Their eyes were no longer on the machine itself, but on Liam. As he continued his work, the whirring of the machine grew louder, more pronounced. The hum had become steadier, more consistent. It was as if the system was waking up, slowly at first, then with more confidence. The very thing they had ridiculed him for was now coming to life. Murmurs of disbelief began to ripple through the room. Some of the executives leaned forward, their skepticism turning to confusion. How was this possible? The machine that had failed them all week was now functioning. Victoria's face, once filled with superiority, shifted. Her smirk faded, replaced with a hint of uncertainty. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him. Liam, still focused, didn't glance at anyone. He kept his eyes on the screen, his fingers now flying over the keyboard with newfound purpose. The crowd, once laughing at his expense, now watched in stunned silence. His actions, his competence were speaking louder than anything they had said. And just like that, the machine stabilized. The system, which had been nothing but an expensive liability, was now running smoothly, humming quietly as though it had never failed. The room was silent. Liam had done it. The first signs of success were in front of them, undeniable, irreversible. The room was suddenly engulfed in silence as the machine began to hum. The flicker of light on the screen, which had once seemed like a small glimmer of hope, now stabilized into a steady glow. A soft whir filled the air as the system responded to the changes Liam had made. It was working, the AI was functioning, its errors gradually being corrected. Victoria froze, her eyes wide, her hands gripped tightly on the edge of the table. Her confident, mocking expression began to falter, replaced by panic. She had assumed the failure was inevitable, that Liam would be exposed as incompetent. But now, as the machine hummed back to life, the room's atmosphere shifted, and so did the power. "No," Victoria snapped, her voice rising in frustration. "This is impossible. You must have cheated. There's no way you fixed it this fast." Her eyes darted toward the screen, then back to Liam, her tone filled with disbelief. "This is a trick. You bypassed something. You cheated." Her accusation hung in the air, but Liam didn't flinch. He didn't react to her desperation. His response was calm, steady, and unshaken. "No, Victoria," Liam said, his voice clear, cutting through the chaos. "The system was only misaligned. You were looking for a problem, but the solution was simpler than you expected." The words didn't just diffuse her accusation. They shattered it. Victoria, who had been the source of all the tension, was now scrambling to regain her footing. But there was no escape from the truth. Her tirade had been exposed for what it was, empty noise meant to belittle, to undermine. Now, the room was no longer on her side. The executives, who had once remained neutral, watching from the sidelines, now shifted their gaze. No one spoke at first, but the shift was palpable. The room had become a theater of quiet realization. Liam wasn't just the assistant they had dismissed. He was the one who had solved the problem that had eluded all of them. One by one, the room's energy began to change. Eyes that had once glared at Liam with skepticism or disdain now lingered with respect. No longer did the executives look down on him. Now they watched his every move with full attention. Victoria's once commanding presence was now overshadowed by the weight of her defeat. Her face flushed with humiliation as she tried to retake control, but it was too late. The power had shifted. Liam remained calm, his focus unbroken. The machine, now operating smoothly, was proof of his competence, of his quiet genius. And the room, once filled with mocking laughter and judgment, was now still, waiting, and for the first time, acknowledging him for who he truly was. Just as Victoria's composure began to crack, her hands trembling and her voice faltering in the face of Liam's quiet victory, a calm intrusion interrupted the tension in the room. The door to the boardroom opened slowly, and all eyes shifted to the figure that stepped inside. It was Thomas, Liam's father. The tall, dignified man exuded an air of authority and experience that filled the room instantly. His presence was commanding, but it was the quiet confidence with which he carried himself that caught everyone's attention. His silver-streaked hair, impeccably tailored suit, and composed demeanor spoke volumes about who he was, not just a man, but a force in the engineering world. Victoria's eyes snapped to him, her expression tightening. She had been so focused on Liam, so sure that his success had been a fluke, that she hadn't even considered the possibility that he had a mentor who might be just as formidable as the work he had accomplished. Liam didn't look up at his father immediately. He continued to type, his hands steady as he finished fine-tuning the system. But when he spoke, his voice held an unshakable certainty. "Victoria, you've been mistaken about me," Liam said, his gaze still on the machine in front of him. "You've underestimated me, but you've also underestimated who I learned from." There was a pause. Liam finally stood and turned toward the door where his father stood, silent but radiating authority. "This is Thomas Washington," Liam continued, his voice clear and unwavering, "an esteemed engineer and former corporate partner at Silverbrook Solutions. He's the man who taught me everything I know about engineering." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Victoria's face drained of color as the realization began to settle in. She had been so sure of her judgment, so quick to dismiss Liam as just another entry-level employee, that she never thought to consider his true background. But now the truth was undeniable. Thomas's reputation in the industry was legendary. He had transformed failing companies with his innovative approaches to engineering, turning them into powerhouses. The thought that this man, who had shaped Liam's understanding of technology, was standing in the room suddenly made Victoria's mockery feel all the more foolish. Liam's quiet genius wasn't just something he had stumbled upon. It was the result of years of mentorship, guidance, and rigorous training under one of the best in the business. Victoria's shock was palpable, her lips parting in disbelief. She hadn't just underestimated Liam, she had underestimated his entire foundation. The room, which had been filled with judgment and condescension moments ago, now felt the shift. The executives who had been silent onlookers now exchanged glances, their initial skepticism replaced by genuine interest. The realization that Liam's brilliance was backed by real, hands-on experience had completely transformed their perception of him. Victoria stood frozen, her eyes locked on Thomas. There were no words left for her. The truth had been laid bare, and now there was no denying it. Liam had been underestimated, but no longer. The section ends with the room slowly acknowledging Liam's true identity. No more mocking, no more dismissing, only respect. The power had fully shifted. Liam stood, his calm demeanor unwavering as he pulled up the evidence. The tension in the room had reached a boiling point, and it was time for the truth to be laid bare. With methodical precision, he inserted the USB drive into the computer and began displaying the damning evidence, the proof of mismanagement, negligence, and her failure to act on critical information. The screen in front of him flickered, and the first document appeared. Urgent AI system calibration warning. Missed deadline. The email chain was dated 2 weeks prior, clearly outlining the malfunctioning components of the system, along with recommendations for necessary adjustments. The emails from Liam and other engineers had been clear: immediate attention needed. But instead of acting on these warnings, Victoria had dismissed them, claiming they were too minor and not worth the disruption to the current timeline. Liam clicked through more documents, system logs showing errors that Victoria had ignored, the risks she had disregarded, and the critical updates she had pushed aside. There were timestamps, conversations, and feedback from team members, all of it evidence that Victoria had chosen to put profit over the well-being of the system, and in doing so had triggered its failure. "Do you see it now, Victoria?" Liam's voice broke the silence, steady but carrying an undeniable weight. "This is your doing. You chose to ignore the system warnings, dismissed the experts, and pushed the project forward with no regard for the consequences. These are your decisions, your failures." Victoria's face went pale, her lips trembling as the room fell into stunned silence. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She looked at the screen, at the undeniable truth displayed before her. The very emails she had brushed off, the logs she had failed to address, were now her undoing. Her voice shook as she tried to regain control. This doesn't mean anything. These are just emails, logs. You can't hold me responsible for this." She took a step forward, desperate, but her words were a weak defense against the mounting evidence. But Liam was relentless. He clicked on more documents, each one more damaging than the last. He brought up the contractual records, where she had signed off on cutting-edge recommendations from engineers, only to ignore them when the pressure to meet deadlines became too great. The legal ramifications were clear now, gross negligence and mismanagement that could bring about serious legal consequences for her and the company. One by one, the executives in the room began to look away from her, their eyes shifting towards Liam, who was now the undeniable source of truth. Whispers spread across the room. Some of the board members had already begun to glance at each other, clearly seeing the cracks in Victoria's armor. Victoria, her composure shattered, turned toward the executives in a last-ditch attempt to salvage her position. But her panic was evident now. "This is a setup. A lie!" she cried out, her voice growing frantic. "I didn't." But her voice broke as the room, once filled with her unquestioned authority, turned completely. They were no longer looking at her with respect or fear. They were watching her unravel, her mask of control slipping with every word. The weight of Liam's revelations sank in, and the room, now fully turned against Victoria, fell into a deep silence. Her empire, her control, was crumbling before her eyes. The section ends with Victoria standing frozen, the full realization of her defeat settling in. Panic floods her face as the crowd's judgment becomes clear. The power had shifted, and it was irreversible. 48 hours later, Victoria Edwards was no longer CEO. The board had unanimously voted her out, her reputation shattered beyond repair. Internal audits had confirmed the negligence Liam had exposed, the system failures, her refusal to act on clear warnings, and the disastrous effects her decisions had caused. It was a stunning collapse for the once untouchable CEO, who now faced legal action for her gross mismanagement. Her career was in tatters, and with it the empire she had built. Liam, on the other hand, had become something entirely different, a symbol of competence, dignity, and quiet strength. The moment his expertise had been recognized, doors began to open. Offers from top tech firms flooded in, some of the biggest names in the industry eager to have him join their ranks. The salary figures were more than generous, and the opportunities seemed endless. But Liam didn't flinch. He didn't need those offers. Instead, Liam made a decision that shocked many. He chose to decline all the lucrative offers and return to something far more meaningful to him. He'd chosen to work alongside Thomas, his father, the man who had mentored him, guided him, and believed in him when no one else did. Together, they would create something far greater than any corporate job could offer. Their new venture focused on developing innovative AI solutions, ones that would push the boundaries of technology in ways the industry hadn't yet imagined. Sitting side by side with his father in their modest office, Liam reflected on everything that had transpired. The brutal public humiliation, the endless mockery, the feeling of being underestimated, all of it had led him here. He had not fought for revenge or recognition. He had fought for truth. In the end, it was his quiet competence that had won the day, not the loud defiance Victoria had expected. Liam's journey had taught him something invaluable, that dignity and action were the true markers of power. He hadn't needed to prove anything through words or force. His work had spoken for itself. Every step of the way, he had chosen integrity over convenience, patience over frustration, and quiet action over empty gestures. As he turned to his father, who was poring over a new set of AI algorithms, Liam felt a deep sense of peace. This was the work he had been meant for. He wasn't here for accolades or applause. He was here to build, to innovate, and to create. In the end, that was all that truly mattered. Liam had turned a night of humiliation into a triumph, not through loud defiance, but through quiet brilliance. In the end, he had proven that even in the face of prejudice, action, not words, would always prevail. And now, working beside his father on their new venture, Liam was finally where he was meant to be, at peace with himself and with the world.